Tonight I will be addressing the topic church planting, the call to and the need for. The purpose of this speech is to inform you, specifically to inform you about the biblical call to and the great need for the local church to plant churches. My thesis for tonight's speech is this: the Bible mandates that the local church plant churches, and there is a great need for churches to be planted. In their book, The Churching of America, Roger Fink and Rodney Stark write of the history of success in the churching of America through church planting, specifically in the 19th century. They write this: in 1820, there was one Christian church for every 875 U.S. residents. One for every 875 U.S. residents. But from 1860 to 1906, U.S. Protestant churches planted one new church for increase of 350 in the population, bringing the ratio by the start of World War I to just one church for every 430 persons. In 1906, over a third of all congregations in the country were less than 25 years old. Now, this is particularly relevant for us here living in Atlanta, in the suburbs. We have churches on every corner, and perhaps some of you this evening are completely convinced that we do not need more church plants. The Bible, however, mandates church planting, and the need for more church plants in North America has never been higher. Now, I must say, I have spent several years now studying the biblical call to church planting and planting myself. As some of you know, I am the planting pastor for preaching and teaching here at Highview Church just outside of Atlanta. And over these past several years, I have spent much time pondering and considering these things, specifically the need for church planting. So first tonight, 2 points I will give you. First is this: I will discuss the biblical mandate to plant churches. And secondly, I will discuss the great need for church planting here in North America. Number one, planting churches is primarily the responsibility of the local church. It is mandated by the New Testament. The Great Commission in Matthew 28, verse 18 says this: Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." How can we obey the Great Commission and not plant churches? Making disciples and baptizing converts is primarily taught in the New Testament as the duty of the local church. Pastor and church planting expert Tim Keller writes in his essay on why plant churches, quote, "Only a person who is being evangelized in the context of an ongoing worshiping and shepherding community can be sure of finally coming home into vital, saving faith." In other words, the local church must plant churches, and the local church is the primary means by which God is accomplishing the Great Commission, and therefore we must as well. The Apostle Paul himself emphasized the need for church plants. As we know from the New Testament, Paul spent the majority of his ministry going into heavily populated towns and planting churches. We see this in Acts 16, starting in verse 9. "And a vision appeared to Paul in the night. A man of Macedonia was standing there, urging him and saying, 'Come over to Macedonia and help us.' And Paul had seen the vision. Immediately he sought to go out into Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. So setting sail from Troas, he made a direct voyage to Samothrace, and the following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is a leading city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in the city some days." Planting churches was a fundamental part of the apostolic ministry of Paul. So we've seen both the biblical mandate and the method used in the New Testament for planting churches for the spread of the gospel. Next, we look at a few practical needs, at the practical need for new church plants in the 21st century. There is a very real and profound need for more new churches to be planted. Yes, even in the Bible Belt. Joel Comiskey, in his book, Planting Churches That Reproduce, writes this: "No time in American history has the need for new churches been more critical. New church planters are needed now to scale back the decline and death of existing churches. In order to survive, Christ's church must be replanted in every generation." Ed Stetzer, a church planting expert, wrote this, quote, "The U.S. is the largest mission field in the Western Hemisphere. The spiritual deadness of North America appears not only in its culture, but in its churches as well." He goes on to write, 80 to 85% of American churches are on the downside of their life cycle. More than 3,500 churches close every year. The percentage of Christians in the U.S. population dropped 9% from 1990 to 2001. The number of unchurched has doubled from 1991 to 2004, end quote. There is a great need, and there is a biblical call to plant churches. And we've discussed both of these two aspects. We've discussed the biblical mandate for church planting as outlined in the Great Commission. And secondly, we have discussed the great practical need for church planting. In conclusion, may we commit ourselves to obeying Jesus by fulfilling the Great Commission through planting local churches. May we be committed to following the Apostle Paul's method of reaching the cities intentionally through church planting. And may we respond to the great need before us as we plant churches for the sake of the gospel and the glory of God. Thank you for being here this evening. God bless.